Domitian, Part II. From the Lives of the 12 Caesars, by Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Leeson. The Lives of the 12 Caesars, by Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus. Translated by Alexander Thompson and edited by T. Forrester. Domitian, Part II, paragraphs 11 through 23. His cruelties were not only excessive, but subtle and unexpected. The day before he crucified a collector of his rents, he sent for him into his bedchamber, made him sit down upon the bed by him, and sent him away well pleased, and, so far as could be inferred from his treatment, in a state of perfect security, having vouchsafed him the favour of a plate of meat from his own table. When he was on the point of condemning to death Aretinus Clemens, a man of consular rank, and one of his friends and emissaries, he retained him about his person in the same or greater favour than ever, until at last, as they were riding together in the same litter, upon seeing the man who had informed against him, he said, "Are you willing that we should hear this base slave tomorrow?" Contemptuously abusing the patience of men, he never pronounced a severe sentence without prefacing it with words which gave hopes of mercy; so that at last there was not a more certain token of a fatal conclusion than a mild commencement. He brought before the Senate some person accused of treason, declaring, that he should prove that day how dear he was to the Senate, and so influenced them, that they condemned the accused to be punished according to the ancient usage. Then, as if alarmed at the extreme severity of their punishment, to lessen the odiousness of the proceeding, he interposed in these words, for it is not foreign to the purpose to give them precisely as they were delivered: "Permit me, conscript fathers, so far to prevail upon your affection for me, however extraordinary the request may seem, as to grant the condemned criminals the favour of dying in the manner they choose. For by so doing ye will spare your own eyes, and the world will understand that I interceded with the Senate on their behalf." Having exhausted the exchequer by the expense of his buildings and public spectacles, with the augmentation of pay lately granted to the troops, he made an attempt at the reduction of the army in order to lessen the military charges. But reflecting that he should, by this measure, expose himself to the insults of the barbarians, while it would not suffice to extricate him from his embarrassments, he had recourse to plundering his subjects by every mode of exaction. The estates of the living and the dead were sequestered upon any accusation, by whomsoever preferred. The unsupported allegation of any one person, relative to a word or action construed to affect the dignity of the emperor, was sufficient. Inheritances, to which he had not the slightest pretension, were confiscated. If there was found so much as one person to say, he had heard from the deceased when living, that he had made the emperor his heir. Besides the exactions from others, the poll tax on the Jews was levied with extreme rigour, both on those who lived after the manner of Jews in the city, without publicly professing themselves to be such, and on those who, by concealing their origin, avoided paying the tribute imposed upon that people. I remember, when I was a youth, to have been present when an old man, 90 years of age, had his person exposed to view in a very crowded court, in order that, on inspection, the procurator might satisfy himself whether he was circumcised. From his earliest years Domitian was anything but courteous, of a forward, assuming disposition, and extravagant both in his words and actions. When Caenis, his father's concubine, upon her return from Istria, offered him a kiss, as she had been used to do, he presented her his hand to kiss. Being indignant that his brother's son-in-law should be waited on by servants dressed in white, he exclaimed, "Ουκ agathon polikoi ranyi." Too many princes are not good. After he became emperor, he had the assurance to boast in the Senate, that he had bestowed the empire on his father and brother, and they had restored it to him; and upon taking his wife again, after the divorce, he declared by proclamation, that he had recalled her to his pulvinar. He was not a little pleased, too, at hearing the acclamations of the people in the amphitheatre on a day of festival, "All happiness to our Lord and Lady." But when, during the celebration of the Capitoline trial of skill, the whole concourse of people entreated him with one voice to restore Palfurius Sura to his place in the Senate, from which he had been long before expelled, he having then carried away the prize of eloquence from all the orators who had contended for it, he did not vouchsafe to give them any answer, but only commanded silence to be proclaimed by the voice of the crier. With equal arrogance, when he dictated the form of a letter to be used by his procurators, he began it thus: "Our Lord and God commands so and so," whence it became a rule that no one should style him otherwise either in writing or speaking. He suffered no statues to be erected for him in the Capitol, unless they were of gold and silver, and of a certain weight. He erected so many magnificent gates and arches, surmounted by representations of chariots drawn by 4 horses, and other triumphal ornaments, in different quarters of the city, that a wag inscribed on one of the arches the Greek word axche, "It is enough." He filled the office of consul 17 times, which no one had ever done before him, and for the 7 middle occasions in successive years; but in scarcely any of them had he more than the title, for he never continued in office beyond the calends of May, and for the most part only till the ides of January. After his 2 triumphs, when he assumed the cognomen of Germanicus, he called the months of September and October Germanicus and Domitian, after his own names, because he commenced his reign in the one, and was born in the other. Becoming by these means universally feared and odious, he was at last taken off by a conspiracy of his friends and favourite freedmen, in concert with his wife. He had long entertained a suspicion of the year and day when he should die, and even of the very hour and manner of his death, all which he had learned from the Chaldeans, when he was a very young man. His father once at supper laughed at him for refusing to eat some mushrooms, saying, that if he knew his fate, he would rather be afraid of the sword. Being therefore in perpetual apprehension and anxiety, he was keenly alive to the slightest suspicions; insomuch that he is thought to have withdrawn the edict ordering the destruction of the vines, chiefly because the copies of it which were dispersed had the following lines written upon them: Quin me fagis epi rhizonomos epi cartophoriso. Gnaw thou my root, yet shall my juice suffice To pour on Caesar's head in sacrifice. It was from the same principle of fear that he refused a new honour, devised and offered him by the Senate, though he was greedy of all such compliments. It was this, that as often as he held the consulship, Roman knights, chosen by lot, should walk before him, clad in the trabea, with lances in their hands, amongst his lictors and apparitors. As the time of the danger which he apprehended drew near, he became daily more and more disturbed in mind, insomuch that he lined the walls of the porticos in which he used to walk with the stone called phengites, by the reflection of which he could see every object behind him. He seldom gave an audience to persons in custody, unless in private, being alone, and he himself holding their chains in his hand. To convince his domestics that the life of a master was not to be attempted upon any pretext, however plausible, he condemned to death Epaphroditus his secretary, because it was believed that he had assisted Nero, in his extremity, to kill himself. His last victim was Flavius Clemens, his cousin german, a man below contempt for his want of energy, whose sons, then of a very tender age, he had avowedly destined for his successors, and discarding their former names, had ordered one to be called Vespasian, and the other Domitian. Nevertheless, he suddenly put him to death upon some very slight suspicion, almost before he was well out of his consulship. By this violent act he very much hastened his own destruction. During 8 months together there was so much lightning at Rome, and such accounts of the phenomenon were brought from other parts, that at last he cried out, "Let him now strike whom he will." The Capitol was struck by lightning, as well as the temple of the Flavian family, with the Palatine house, and his own bedchamber. The tablet also, inscribed upon the base of his triumphal statue, was carried away by the violence of the storm, and fell upon a neighbouring monument.